please do look at our website to see our full calendar of events. And again, we have things organized already that just haven't been added yet. But not next Thursday, 2 weeks from today, February 13th, in this room at 4 p.m., we will be discussing the translation of Victor Domontovich's novel, Das Grunto, translated as On Shaky Ground. It's a very important novel dealing with 1920s, 1930s, and even going into, it's a very fascinating man that wrote it. And it finally got translated by Oksana Rosenblum, and we will have Tamara Hundarova, who's a leading Ukrainian literature scholar, and we're going to be reading from it and discussing it. So please come to that. We're very excited about that. On the 13th, and then the 14th, the following day, right out here in the atrium, Yuri Shachuk, who runs our Ukrainian Film Club, has a major event. It will be a film screening and discussion of a film called The Eastern Front. And the directors Vitaly Mansky and Yevhen Titarenko are the directors of the film. It's an event that will be running from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. out here in the atrium. So they're also up with more information on the website. So please check that out and some other events that we have. Thank you again for coming today. Very excited to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Dr. Anastasiia Vlasenko. She is our Petro Yatsik postdoctoral research scholar at the Harriman Institute for Ukrainian Studies at Columbia. She's with us for 2 years. This is the first year. In the fall, she taught a class, and several students I know of hers are here. Dr. Vlasenko is also a recent Harvard Ukraine Institute Research Fellow at Harvard's Ukrainian Research Institute and a recent postdoctoral fellow at the NYU Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia. She studied legislative politics and democratization with specialization in politics of Ukraine. Her monograph project, Legislators and Networks, Corruption, Clientelism, and Lawmaking, investigates how legislative networks formed through parliamentary aids can affect rent-seeking behavior in the Ukrainian parliament. Vlasenko was particularly interested in the study of corruption, legislative politics, transitional period reform, propaganda, electoral politics, and forecasting. Her research has been published in the Journal of Politics. Vlasenko received her PhD from the Department of Political Sciences at Florida State University in 2022. In 2021, she worked at the Hertie School in Berlin as a visiting researcher at Florida State University and New York University. Vlasenko taught courses on comparative politics, public policy, quantitative methods, and post-Soviet studies. Her talk today is entitled Legislators and Networks, Corruption, Clientelism, and Lawmaking in Ukraine. Welcome, Anastasiia.
Thank you very much for coming today to my talk, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to present my research. So yes, as you might have guessed from Mark's introduction, this is going to be about one day. But for now, this is just a short presentation. So today I'm going to talk about networks in the Ukrainian parliament, more specifically about how these networks might be formed in an informal way and how they might affect the opportunities to engage in corrupt activities, broadly defined. Obviously, this is something that legislators usually try to hide. So it's not a very straightforward process, to unearth those networks and to just show them. So I'm trying to show a new way to measure those networks, to map them, and to trace literally illegal activities. So let's start from the beginning. How can legislators connect? As any other human being on Earth, they are very well connected. We, as human beings, are connected to our family and our coworkers and our friends. Well, legislators are just the same, except for they are public officials, and therefore there are ties, official ties, formal ties, that they want you to know about them, that they publicize quite efficiently because they want you to vote for them. But there are also informal ties. So with formal ties, there are a lot of things we actually know about politicians, especially those who are elected. For example, we know their ideological proximity, party affiliation, which coalition they belong to or fraction in the parliament, their committee membership, bill co-sponsorship, all of the things that promote them as politicians that make them popular. However, there are informal ties. And these ties are usually something that they are trying to hide, maybe for privacy considerations, but also for not so honest reasons. So this might be kinship, obviously, common background, like Siloviki, Putin, Siloviki are all have the St. Petersburg background, well, that's reference to Russian politics, but like that might work in any other context. Then we have joint rent-seeking, hidden business relations, clientelist networks, and I am specifically looking at their legislative aides. So who are these aides? These are people who are not elected at all, ever. They are, they might exist without us even noticing that they ever were in the Ukrainian parliament. These are people that are being hired by individual legislators when the legislators are elected. And then they just like complete a number of functions that I'm going to talk about in a second, which, might seem just like some sort of like bureaucratic work, but then they might do so much more. And I'm going to talk about it in a second as well. But first, I want to emphasize the network aspect of the whole story. More specifically, I want to offer you a new way of revealing the hidden informal parliamentary networks by establishing links between legislators through their legislative aides. So here is a story. Imagine we have 3 legislators, A, B, and C, and all of them are being elected for a new convocation of the parliament, and their task is to hire legislative aides. We will talk in a second how many they can hire, but at this moment, number is not that important. The important aspect is that these are basically their assistants. So they can hire them, they can fire them as much as they want. And now imagine a story that I am a new graduate from like a law school and I really want to be in the politics, and I apply to a less popular politician because that's like an easier entry point to become their legislative aide. And through an extremely competitive process, I am being elected as one of legislative aides. I'm excited. I enter the parliament as a legislative aide. Well, I really want to make a career happen. So I worked really hard and I am highly visible to other bureaucrats in the Ukrainian parliament who have been there for years. And so when this less popular, let's say, parliamentarian, let's say MPA, is kind of done with me and wants to fire me, and I feel like I'm about to lose my job, and that may happen in just like a couple of months after I was hired. Like Ukrainian politics are unstable. I might start looking for other people to hire me. And imagine that legislator B is a little bit more popular and more well-funded, and let's say can offer me a better salary. Well, with the help of other bureaucrats in the apparatus of the Verkhovna Rada, I might negotiate a new job offer. But this way, it will happen that just within one convocation, I, legislative aide 3, in this case, will be hired by both legislator A and legislator B. Well, it's obvious that I'm probably not the best candidate for legislator B, who is like popular and rich and yada, yada, yada. But they are still willing to hire me, this still pretty fresh college graduate, because they know that I will be able to connect them to legislator A, who might be not within their same ideological spectrum side, not in the same party. Like there is really no connection between them. But through hiring exact same person, they are being connected. And you might be wondering, how often does it happen? And my answer is all the time. Like you look at those profiles and you can't believe. Like people work for dozens of legislators, over like the last 15 years, 16 years. Their tenures really differ. So here's a number of fun facts about legislative aides in the Ukrainian parliament right now, so that we are, so to say, on the same page. So each legislator legally can have up to 31 legislative aides at a time. But if you hire and fire people all the time, numbers get really high really fast. At the same time, they can be paid and unpaid. Imagine how many unpaid workers you can have if you're a popular politician. And there are full-time and part-time positions available. Currently, Verkhovna Rada has more than 4,000 legislative aides. That's an army of people. people who are in the Ukrainian politics, affecting legislative process all the time, and yet we know nothing about them, right? They're like these invisible creatures of Verkhovna Rada. So officially, out of those more than 4,000, more than 300,000 are unpaid. So you might be wondering, who would want a full-time job for which they are not even remunerated? Well, there are a number of motivations, and we'll discuss them further. A little bit less than 1,000 are paid, and there are 69,800 who are paid but part-time. So the highest number of legislative aides belongs to a member of the parliament from the former OPZZ, so this is like pro-Russian political force. It's currently illegal, but I decided to keep it, former opposition, just for you to understand whom I'm referring to. And only 4 members of the Ukrainian parliament have only one legislative aide per person. So they are, outliers. They are not typical for us. So what do legislative aides do? Officially, they're there to create laws, basically, right? They're supposed to prepare draft bills, negotiate them in the committees, write reports on what happened in the committees. If, for example, the respective legislator cannot attend, they meet with voters, so they also promote politicians. They communicate with national and local governments, so it's like a link between legislative and executive branch, and they have to do all the PR that legislator might be involved in. So these are their legislative work. And this is what is in Reglement, or like regulations of Verkhovna Rada. This is all like what is it supposed to be. However, unofficially, they can do a lot of things. So many of them serve as bodyguards, literally. This is still a form of aid to a legislator, you might argue. Also, they work as personal assistants, secretaries, PR, stylists, designers, you name it. So, like they literally just run to dry cleaners for their legislators, stuff like that. They assist with business because business, even though it's illegal for Ukrainian legislators to be actively involved in their own business, they still do that. So they help with that. They help with internal party politics, which especially became very important once Ukraine gained supermajority in its parliament in 2019, and all Ukrainian politicians became very, very involved in party politics. They supervise personal projects, so like art projects of their, legislators, or I don't know, some sort of charity projects, or, and this is unfortunately the majority of them, because again, more than 3,000 of them are not paid. They do just nothing. They have their identification cards, which they use for, in a variety of settings, but they don't do much. And when you ask people around, like, so what do they do? Not much. So okay. So imagine this army of people, the majority of whom are unpaid and actually allowed to do nothing. Who are they? Like, who would want a job like this, right? Based on my analysis, most of them have either a master's or a bachelor's degree in like economic theory or in law. So, these are educated people. There are also some students and like recent graduates, but very often we see that people also hire their party affiliates, so those who are not elected into the Verkhovna Rada, but they want to be there. There are also lots of bureaucrats from other state institutions. So fun fact, Verkhovna Rada is connected to the Cabinet of Ministers through like underground channel, like this underground corridors. So you can go back and forth. And there are lots of people who work as legislative aides in the Verkhovna Rada, but they also happen to be in the Cabinet of Ministers or other individual ministers, as state employees. And these are obviously business affiliates, and there are a lot of relatives and friends. And how do we know that they're relatives and friends? Well, for example, here we see Yuri Koryavchenko. He is a friend of Zelensky. He is his co-worker from like his comedian career. He is also was involved in his business, operations for years. And here are the things. So he obviously ran as part of Sluha Narodu, right? He was elected. And all this time, his wife, she was like nowhere publicly, visible or available or anything like that. Then he gets elected and immediately appoints her as his legislative aide with a very, very small salary, like $200, something like that. People still get upset about this $200 because it's like from the state budget, stuff like that. But like other than that, it's not a big deal. The problem is that this woman, within a year, the first year of her employment as a legislative aide, became a multimillionaire. Even though before that, she wasn't one. So how did she do that? How did she achieve such incredible success? And their official response to mass media is that she is just like a very successful businesswoman. But how did that happen? These are all very good and reasonable questions. And other people who did not become multimillionaires, but still kind of weird, are this three. So this is not my screenshot, otherwise it wouldn't be a Russian. This post was taken down immediately. So this was like, journalists who took this screenshot, but that's a post from Facebook. And it was posted by another MP from Sluha Narodu, Marina Nikitina, here she is. And she basically took a selfie with her husband and makeup artist. And it says, friends, get used to that. The country is changed by comedians, photographers, wedding hosts, makeup artists, and car mechanics. Her husband is a car mechanic. So this is a trend. That was her argument. You can imagine the public backlash. But just like to be fair to her, she fought really well. Like this guy stayed hired for more than a year before she finally fired them. And all of this time they were getting their salaries. Her argument was that I'm not paying them thousands of dollars, I'm just paying them a couple of hundreds per year, per month. So like it should be fine. So yeah, people can hire their immediate relatives, people can hire their friends, or people can hire someone who is actually qualified, completely up to them. So all of that brings us to a very logical question. How do legislative aides earn money if the majority of them are actually, not even paid? Well, we have a total budget of 260 million Ukrainian hryvnias, which is a little bit less than $6.5 million US. Not that much if you think about the sheer numbers and volume of people involved, right? So each MP, if they pay the minimum salary, they can only afford 10 aides, not more than that. And in reality, they each get a little bit more than 38,000 hryvnias per month. Again, like this is about like a monthly salary of a Ukrainian professor, but they have to divide it by 10 at least, right? If they want to have 10. And so this is obviously not enough. Well, lucky for them, look, Ukrainian legislation does not prohibit alternative sources of funding. You can actually pay salary from wherever you want. So this might be just personal funds. Like if you're an oligarch, it's not that expensive for you to, hire just 10 people to help you. There are also wealthy donors who are helping, and there are obviously party money. So for example, Sluha Narodu is one of these, or Batkushina. These are very rich parties. They can help fund their own legislative aides. So imagine that you've been hired, everything is fine, you have some sort of salary, nobody is accusing you that you're married to your employer, everything is great. What do you want? Well, the most obvious answer is career in politics. In fact, lots of former legislative aides are currently active MPs. So this is a reliable route to Verkhovna Rada if you really want to be elected. However, you might want a career in the specific subfield. So there are committees on environmental protection, education, defense. If you want to work there, that might be a very respectable way to get into your subfield. Obviously, some of them just want political connections for business. And when we talk about oligarchs, for example, the majority of their legislative aides are their business partners. They're there just for some sort of perks or protections for their private businesses. Obviously, there might be political connections for nonprofit organizations. So we have a very sound number of NGO representatives among legislative aides, especially in Holos. Holos is like a minority party that marketed themselves as an opposition party in 2019, opposition to Zelensky, since 2021, they were voting together with Sluha Naroda, so they are also like shifting. There might be concerns for personal safety if you have problems. Being a legislative aid kind of protects you, and finally, you might be willing to participate in rent seeking, and that's what I'm particularly interested in. So let's look at what's going on right now. So these are the parties as they were elected into the Ukrainian parliament. Again, opposition over here. At first they were outlawed. They tried to form this platform for life and peace, but currently they are independent. I just didn't want to mix them with independent or truly independent and came to Ukrainian parliament like that. And so if you look at the percentages, how many they have, this numbers of legislative aids are proportional to the size of the party, so there is nothing weird going on here. And also look at the percentage of full-time versus part-time versus unpaid. They are more or less the same across all parties. I cannot point to a party where oh, they are paying all of their legislative aids, they're the most honest or something like that. No, it is exact same story for all parties. So in addition, when we look at the average number of legislative aids, you can see that parties that are establishment parties have larger average number of legislative aids. And that kind of makes sense, because if you are a legislative aid to have career in politics, you want to belong to establishment, so you will go there. It's just as easy as it is. And those who market themselves as non-establishment have the smallest number. But look, the smallest average number is 8 compared to 14. Again, okay, almost twice less, but I would argue that the variation is not that big. So here's what I'm trying to understand. If we assume that legislators are connected through their legislative aids, how does it affect proliferation of corruption? Is there any connection? Does it increase? Does it decrease participation in the corruption schemes? And my main argument that having better level of connectedness within this network actually makes it easier for you to participate in corruption schemes and makes you more corrupt. And I explain this by the fact that if you are well connected within the legislative aids network, you are more efficient as a politician, because you can do more through your legislative aids. You are also more capable to cater to your potential bribe payers by having all the connections that allow you to co-sponsor more effectively, co-sponsor bills more effectively, to make people vote for your bills, and to finally to have your policies adopted. So you're just more efficient, and you are capable of performing well for potential bribe seekers. So legislative networks are a widely researched phenomenon. I'm not making any scientific novelty contribution here by just taking something completely original. No, we know that legislative networks do exist in a variety of forms. We know that they are associated with increased chances of corruption in multiple democracies, and I'm arguing here that Ukraine is a young democracy, right? And finally, there are suggestions that clientelism might be explaining this connection. That you want to belong to clientelist network, and that's how informal clientelist network looks. So my independent variable here is the number of measures that quantify centrality of the legislature in this network. Usually it's the number of edges, or literally to how many other politicians you are connected through legislative aids. There is also closeness. So basically this is the shortest path to another politician. Do you need multiple legislative aids in between, or just one? And finally, there is betweenness. That's basically how central you are in the network around you. And my dependent variables are the number of corruption scandals as recorded and measured by fact-checking NGOs in Ukraine, and also cash of unidentified origin in Ukrainian politicians' tax declarations. So here is a side note. In Ukraine, we have a law that everybody who works for the state has to publish their tax declarations every year. And for whatever reason, it became an unwritten rule, a good tradition, I would say, to put enormous amounts of cash into these tax declarations as if you have them. And I'm speaking millions of dollars here. And very often people use these declarations to actually legalize their illegal assets. Because if it's in the tax declaration, well, you declared it, so, and you just claim that you always have this like stack of bills in your bedroom, I don't know. So people do that all the time, and because of that, we have lots of tax declarations of Ukrainian legislators where we have this like cash and there is absolute origin blank. You just happen to have $800,000, in your closet just because. So obviously my data suffers from some, limitations. First of all, Verkhovna Rada really doesn't want us to know about legislative aids. And they literally started deleting list of legislative aids from the 4th, 5th, and 6th convocation. That's like, at this point, like 20 years ago, 10 to 20 years ago. So they kind of reasoned that this data lost historical significance. Well, it didn't. If these people worked for my predecessor and right now they work for me, I'm probably, connected to my predecessor, but, whatever. And they started destroying these documents on January 17th, 2018. This is their official response, like, please don't reach out to us. We don't have this data, basically. And but luckily for us, there are people who have been collecting this data for years and years and years, and therefore you cannot really destroy documents and pretend these people never existed. So who are these wonderful people who are helping me and everybody who wants to learn this topic, more about this topic? These are a number of organizations, NGOs, that are trying to collect as much data as possible. So the first one is Posipaki. Posipaki are like AIDS minions, if you wish. And there we have like very detailed records of every legislative aid who ever existed, what they did, biographical data. That's a very rich resource. Unfortunately, its founder right now is not working on this project because he's literally in the trenches. So, the project, like if you want to like search it right now, it's not active, but I hope that it will be active very soon. So yeah, but I collected data long ago. Then we have Chestnut. Chestnut is active, so you can explore it, and I will explore it in a second for you with some screenshots. It's a wonderful website where you have lots and lots of information about Ukrainian politicians. Chestnut means honest, right? So it's a wonderful resource. Then we have declarations.com.ua. These are tax declarations. Again, they were disabled during the when the full-scale invasion started. Then there was public pressure to kind of make this website live again, then like back and forth. It's a mess. And again, rather for you, it's like voting patterns of Ukrainian politicians and what they do in the parliament. These two are connected, so unfortunately both are not live right now. So this is Chestnut, their political hub, as they call it. And this is just like a screenshot of a very random, there is no like secret message here, a random Ukrainian MP. So on this website, we have all the information about each individual MP. So for example, we know that he's voting for other people without, identification. So he has some bad things. We know which party he belongs to. There is a bio, but also we know his like education, parties, candidacy, fractions, and most interestingly, obviously, his legislative aids. Here they are. So if we click here, we will see a list of 40 legislative aides who works for him. Again, not all of them worked at the same time, so my whole data collection is like very sensitive to like dates, but other than that, it's easy to assume that this person is connected. So unfortunately, this is one of those situations with network analysis that when you just map the network, it doesn't tell you much. We see that there are like some weird clusters. We see that there are politicians who do not hire anyone else's, legislative aides. They just like stay away from this network completely. But other than that, it's not particularly informative. So if it is not that informative to us, maybe we should run some analysis and see how the levels of connectedness within this legislative network is affecting, a variety of measures that I'm trying to see. So first of all, it looks like the more connected you are within this network, the more likely you are to co-sponsor a bill. So you are active politician. You are not just showing up and doing nothing there. In addition, interestingly enough, I don't know how to explain it yet. It decreases your physical presence in the parliament. You're just like not showing up to work. You're like, I'm connected, I'm popular. You know, I don't have to be there. Working from home, I don't know. It decreases the probability of voting against the party line, meaning that the more connected you are, the more loyal you are, which makes perfect sense to me. And it increases your connections to oligarchs. Well, you might argue, well, that's just by probability, you know, but at the same time, you know, that actually suggests that all oligarchs are in those networks. So, you know, kind of unearths this like clientelist edge of the argument. It also increases by quite a bit the probability that you have less cash of unidentified origin. Yes, it makes you richer in cash, but you cannot tell me where this cash comes from, you know, that kind of thing. And finally, it does increase probability of corruption by a lot, you know. And basically, if you are in this network, like, yeah, you're more likely to be involved in corruption scandals. And measures of my, you know, like closeness or edges of my independent variables don't really change the results. It's basically all the same. Well, let's look at this whole story in further detail. So let me like show you what's happening here. So this is the measure, the edges here is every edge is like every connection, right? And if you have less edges than the mean or average number of edges per politician, you're red. And if you're having more edges than mean or average per politician, you are blue or green here. So basically, these are less connected people. These are more connected people in my network. And then I'm trying to see where they are on this two-dimensional space between corruption scandals and cash of identified origin. So it looks like less connected, the red ones, they are less likely to be in the corruption scandals and less likely to have a lot of cash. But as the number of corruption and the probability of corruption scandal is increasing, you know, the cash of unidentified origin is also increasing. Kind of makes sense to me, you know, like where all this cash is coming from after all. Like. And this is just a different like measure of your connectedness, so closeness, like how close you are to the furthest politician in your network. And yeah, unfortunately here it's less for connections with oligarchs because there are not that many oligarchs, right? We have just a couple of outliers, but basically here the story is exactly the same. So those who are less connected, they have lesser probability of corruption scandals. And also they happen to be connected to just one or two oligarchs. But as your probability of being involved in the corruption scandal is increasing, well, for some of them, you can see that the probability of being connected to more oligarchs is also increasing. Just to be fair, this part is like far less finer than this part because we have a couple of badly connected you know, like, I don't know, sidekicks of oligarchs. I don't know who these people are, you know, to be connected to 6 oligarchs, you have to go to places. So, but basically story holds. You have to be well connected to be involved in corruption scandals, to know oligarchs, and to have more cash, I guess, at home. So what do we conclude here? First of all, it looks like legislative aids do help to form those informal networks, you know, at least with regards to corruption. And yeah, they actually connect legislators to potential sources of rent being this like illegal revenue that you can extract while being a tenured politician. Oligarchs being a possible, you know, rent source, but there are so many more. And finally, connections established through legislative aids make it easier to participate in corruption schemes, apparently. Thank you very much for your attention. This is
Thank you so much. It's always so valuable to have somebody presenting here that's been sitting in this material and writing a book on it, and it's a wealth of information. So thank you for sharing it and presenting it in such a clear fashion for us. I want to open up the floor for any questions you may have to our speaker. Based on, yes.
I think this is super interesting. It's I know like how much work goes into just getting that kind of data in the first place. So yeah, I'm really pleased to see some results. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you kind of measure and operationalize like the corruption scandals. I mean, you're relying kind of on a website for this. I can foresee there being kind of like some issues with that kind of data. So I just like to hear a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this question. So yes, how do you measure corruption if they are trying to hide corruption? So unfortunately, all our measures of corruption that like exist, not just in Ukrainian politics, but out there, is only about corruption cases that are known, right? So how it works in Ukraine. My data all comes from Chesno, right? And Chesno has this like corruption index, basically their own creation. How does it work? They basically look into mass media reports on corruption scandals when somebody was arrested or somebody was actually went to court. And then they kind of match it with the judicial record of Ukraine, where we also have corruption cases, all of them listed. Well, that's only for those caught red-handed. Everybody who was not caught is just not in the data set. With regards to my analysis, I assume that I know that it is a very strong assumption. I assume that all Ukrainian legislators have equal chance of not being caught if they really try hard. You know, is it true? Is it not true? Obviously, this is up for debate. But again, like this is the best I could find, you know. But if you have any suggestions, I'm open to any suggestions.
I guess just my comment on that would be like, this is relying on like the really great work of like Ukrainian NGOs, and that's not criticism at all, but like I don't know to what extent in your book you like explain like the work of something like Chester and why this is a really valuable data source, because I can imagine for some folks who aren't as familiar with the Ukrainian case, they might be like, oh, well, like, why would you rely so much on the work of like this organization? Whereas anyone who knows Ukraine knows that like Chester does fantastic work in Ukraine, has really incredible like investigative journalism to like read out corruption. So I would just make sure like push that when you're talking like about it.
Yeah, none of that would be possible without them. Like these guys have been working for so many years. Yeah.
Are they in trouble now with funding?
Yes, 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 it is USAID.
Yeah.
Wonder about do you have a further, say, typology or categorization of different kinds of aids? Because it seems that the category, it includes people like you mentioned, right? Zelensky's buddy and Zelensky's buddy's wife. And those are maybe new people who come in. And then there are also, it seems that there are these kind of career aids, right? People who move around in the system. And it seems that they would maybe be indicative of different kinds of networks, right? One is kind of pre-existing, where a new WebP gets slotted into a new network just by hiring the same people that everyone else hired. And then in other cases, they're bringing networks with them, it sounds like, right? And introducing them to the system. So people who weren't formally aids. So I was just wondering if you could help disentangle that. Maybe there's certain different functions, maybe that's a seamless process. I'm just curious what that ecosystem looks like.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, unless this people used to work as legislative aides in the previous convocations or were hired by legislators in the previous convocations, they wouldn't be in this networks because in this network because I wouldn't be able to observe them. Like even if, let's say, Zelensky's business affiliates were all connected through their, I don't know, personal assistants in the past, they were nowhere in the politics. There is absolutely no way for me to know. So I actually ran this analysis for previous convocations, and it is so much more than for this one. So because people were established and people were better connected. What was surprising for me personally was that even after I ran it with the 9th convocation, it still held because there were lots of new people who came and they're still are connected. So answering your question, yes, it might be possible that people are bringing new networks with them network that used to be business networks, but right now they're legislative networks. No, it is not possible for me to see those networks that people might have brought, like brand new networks. And I only have to rely on the parliamentary record of legislative aids since 1991. That's all I really have. So if these people used to, have different positions, then they switch to legislative aids. This is something, yeah, they will not show up because, how do I know what they used to do? Like private individuals in Ukraine don't have to publicize their like employment record if they don't want to.
Yes, Charlie.
Other aids, I mean, the figures are massive on the number of aid unpaid. Are they exempt from conscription? Do they have any reason to work there and to have identification or is there any connection with the military service and with the war?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. So the situation is rapidly changing. At first, like in the first draft that they had, like 2 years ago at this point, year and a half, the idea was, yes, to make them exempt of everything, but that decision was very unpopular with the general public for obvious reasons. So they kind of dropped this rule by trying to, to prevent them from being mobilized for other channels. For example, until recently, you were able to avoid draft completely if you were employed in an educational institution, if you were some sort of, like state employee of the like core functionality, stuff like that. And given that so many of these people work for ministries, work for, like work in education or can be hired in education if they really want to because of their connections, many of them were like quite effectively avoiding draft. But as of right now, there are no like individual protections, so to say. And I believe if they were, that would still like, it would not feel well. Here is fun fact. So the oldest son of Poroshenko, Alexei Poroshenko, he was a member of the Ukrainian parliament in the 8th convocation. He was also a legislative aide for who knows how long for his father, literally, right? So we have this person with like very good records of being there. And then when he stopped being a Ukrainian member of the parliament, he just left the country. And he has been living abroad since, I don't know, like 2018, I believe. And recently there was this like big campaign to like bring him back and to make him serve in the army because he was drafted and he's not coming back and just paying fines. So, and it's been going on for quite a few months at this point. And his lawyers are just like, oh, that's political persecution against Poroshenko. We don't.
He served in the army actually.
Yes, he did. That's the craziest part. Yes, just to be fair here, he did join the army and he served under a different name, like nom de guerre. Like as it's popular for people who are of some importance since 2014 all the way up to 2018, I believe. So it's not like he doesn't. That's probably why he was one of the first to be drafted. In fact, and yeah. So I don't know, like.
Would be interesting to see the figures of how many men had joined when they were protected, and how many are still in now, or future numbers.
Yeah, I mean that would be quite interesting. Just like it's also related to corruption, as we recently heard with Ukrainian senior army psychologists. So.
Yes.
So from the sources they use to like artists corruption, maybe like people's like personal finances, is the DIA app of any use in this? Because I think like your tax ID like is on it, right? So does that help you like blow these people's records, or is it like very protected on the application?
No, DIA is a different thing. So unfortunately, I cannot use DIA here in any way or form. So for those of you who do not know, every Ukrainian has DIA app on their phone. I also have, I can show you after the talk. And basically this is the app where you can get your like, I don't know, like you can look up your driver's ID, all your passports, your marriage certificate if you have one, your, I don't know, like all of your diplomas that you got in Ukrainian state universities, right? And in this app, you can also request a number of services from the government. So no matter what kind of statement you want, you can get it there. Basically like Ukrainian version of DMV, but on your phone. And it also has this like electronic signature that everybody is using right now to sign documents in Ukraine. So it's an awesome app, but it's very, very individualized. So like, I hope that all of my data is protected, because if it's leaked, you know,
Spot, yeah.
I'm in trouble, right? Because it's linked to all my bank accounts and like everything. That would be very, very inconvenient to think even about it. So same for politicians. All of them are supposed to have DIA app, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to literally sign their documents. But I really hope that their data is protected there. Yes, it does have tax IDs, but tax IDs, so the taxes reported to the tax agency with tax IDs, is a different document than tax declarations that I'm using, because declaration is like you are declaring your taxes. It is as if I decided to tell you how much I'm paying in taxes this year, which would be a very different form, even like to fill, than the one that I'm sending to IRS, if that makes sense.
Sydney, you had a question? Oh, yes.
I'm curious about the comparative scope. You mentioned that classified as a democracy, so you're demonstrating how corrupt the legislative process is and how informal it is, like it's details work. Do you think it would be more productive to compare this case to other hybrid regimes or non-democracies rather, or is it at all productive to make comparisons according to regime type in this case?
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. So if we look into Polity4, Freedom House, all of them, Ukraine is not a democracy. Ukraine is an anocracy. So it's somewhere in the middle. Right. Although, just to be fair, as a reviewer for Freedom House, Ukrainian scores increased by a lot in the last year. So it hasn't been published yet. I have seen that. So spoiler alert. But regardless, so assuming that Ukraine is not really a developed democracy, and I want to think of it as a country with a nascent democratic institutions, let's call it this way. It's still problematic to compare it to countries that are openly non-democratic. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when we look into other studies that are trying to like compare it to other situations, we can see that Ukraine generally has trends that are consistent with a scholarship on democracy but not on autocracies. Let me give you an example. So for example, my other project is on decentralization. And generally speaking, when we look into the literature on decentralization reform is associated with increased welfare spending and like further democratization in democracies, but with the opposite, decreased welfare spending and further consolidation of authoritarian institutions in autocracies. So we have this very vivid split. So by analyzing Ukraine, which is like somewhere in the middle, we can actually see which way it went. And yes, it was associated with increased welfare spending and further democratization, which is like in line with democracy patterns, if you wish. So Ukraine is not a democracy, but based on my personal understanding, when we have like political reforms, even like political behavior, voting behavior, freedom of speech, if you wish, it's kind of like following this like more democratic patterns and authoritarian patterns. That being said, I'm comparing Ukrainian politicians to Ukrainian politicians, right? So, it's within, not across.
Yes, Daniel.
I have a much simpler question. Where do most of these aids come from? Is there a geographical distribution? Like, do they come from specific areas most of the time, like big cities, or is it evenly distributed?
So unfortunately, I do not have consistent data on their place of birth. I can only like see where they got their education from, and these are large cities, right? So unfortunately, I don't know where they were born. All over Ukraine, I would assume, but yes, obviously, given that we have, they tend to be more educated than an average Ukrainian, right? And they tend to be wealthier than an average Ukrainian. Yeah, for obvious reasons. So I wouldn't say that legislative aides are representative of Ukrainian citizens.
Do we know kind of on stepping back a second, on a larger scale, like as far as the public opinion of Ukrainians, what they think of these aides? And, corruption, this is one example of where corruption can develop and does develop, as you showed in Ukraine. But would this be, like we know in Ukraine, a lot of people, Ukraine's contribute to the corruption because they're used to getting things done this way, and in some cases not too happy to change them. Is this one area there where the average Ukrainian would be happy to reform this? Are they seen by Ukrainians as part of the problem, or are they a solution? Is that how they get things done? You know, understand my question? Is it something that's they would like to address? Is it a negative thing?
Absolutely, that is a very good question. So basically, my personal project started when I learned about posipaki, right? Posipaki means this word has very negative meaning, right? Like sidekicks or something like that. So the whole like NGO project devoted to legislative aids has like this like negative name to it. So that I think that really reflects what people think about them. And if we think back into the 90s, like when like right now in comparison to 90s, Ukraine has no corruption, so many things changed. There was like such big progress made. So back in the 90s, having an ID of legislative aid could like basically get you out of any trouble, like drunk driving, not a problem. Fight in a bar, not a problem, like you just needed to show that to the police. It's not like this anymore. Like these people are being persecuted for crimes that they commit, like that's much more transparent. However, I believe that generally speaking, people, like Ukrainian population doesn't have a very positive, perception of the activities of these people, mostly because they're like behind the scenes, right? We don't really see them. They are supposed to talk to mass media on behalf of the legislators. They don't. They are supposed to like be very transparent about what they're doing. They are not. And so in order to target these problems, there are a number of steps that were taken. For example, just like their employers, legislative aides are supposed to publish their tax declarations. They do, and we actually know if some of them have this tax of cash, in their bathrooms or wherever. We know this. We also know that they're, we also know if they are connected to other like legislative aids families, because they also have to submit declarations on behalf of their like children and husbands and wives and like immediate family members. So we know. And speaking of this Sluha Narodu's wife, she wouldn't be a legislative aid in my network, right? Because she's not connecting her husband to whoever. She's like, she belongs to like this, like stand aside legislative aids. But her tax declarations kind of speak louder than her words, to all of a sudden, buy lots of new cars and apartments and everything like that. If you were literally a housewife for the last 15 years of your life, that's a lot of progress, right? And she was exposed and she was judged by mass media, right? So.
Yes.
That's a
we
good
have another
question. If anyone else wants to, please raise your hand. I have kind of two related questions. So the first one, could you talk a little bit more about the kind of, you alluded to it a bit earlier, but like the time frame of your analysis, like the results you presented, like what time frame were they for, and when you break it down, if you break it down, do you have kind of different results? And related, I was wondering a little bit like how you maybe see the shape of the book and the broader project. Like, are you interested in looking at like particular kinds of centrality, or are you interested at like shifting trends over time? Like if you want to talk about that. I also know books take a long time and maybe you're still figuring it out, but be interested to hear.
Thank you so much. So first and foremost, Ukraine is known for informational transparency, right? We know a lot about Ukrainian politicians and non-elected bureaucrats, but all of this information only started being available in 2014. Before Euromaidan, none of that existed, right? So the only, like, I can could only conduct this analysis for the 8th and the 9th convocation of the Ukrainian parliament, because otherwise they don't have enough data. Now, the records of legislative aides whom they worked for are available since 1991. So that I can do like all the way back into the history. That's why even for the 8th convocation, right, the preceding convocation, I'm saying like, look, these people are connected. You know, yes, yes, through the 8th from the previous parliaments from the previous convocations. So that's for the temporal, age. So there are only 2, electoral cycles, so to say, that I can speak of. Now, about the book. So in the book, so far I have been making more emphasis on my dependent variables. So like, what do they do? So, okay, I established they are somehow connected. What do they do with that? They can, they can get involved in corruption schemes, as I mentioned. They can have the stacks of cash, who knows why. But there are also other things that like I'm exploring in my other projects. So for example, well, they all will belong to the book. They just didn't make it to the slides. So for example, I know that they're more efficient. Those who are more connected, they're more efficient. They work better, basically. They show up to work. They don't show up to work physically, but they show up like on the phone, and they co-sponsor legislation. They vote even if they're not physically present, like there is someone else for them pressing the buttons. Doesn't sound great, but like they do. And actually the percentage of their implemented promises, this is another measure coming from another NGO, Slovo Dilo, the percentage of implemented pre-electoral promises is actually much higher for those who are better connected. And that makes sense. That's not really a story about corruption whatsoever. Yeah. That's like, if you know people, you are going to do a better job. Like in academia, if you know more people, you are organizing better mini conferences. I don't know, like doesn't sound that bad to me, right? So we know that they're more efficient. At the same time, we also know that this increased productivity actually gives them more opportunities to engage in actions that are less advisable. So my task right now with regards to the book is to find balance between like actually like applauding their efforts of like trying to stay connected, paying legislative aides who connect you better actually cost more. Like you have to give them better salaries, right? These are trained professional bureaucrats. And everything we know about zealots among bureaucrats, well, suggests to us that they are very politically biased and they are expensive. So, just saying. So that's a good thing to hire professionals. The bad thing is to use these professionals for corruption. So, I'm trying to find a balance. Yeah.
Good side and bad side, and
Yeah.
that's super interesting.
Yes, you have a question? Any other question? Please raise your hands before the repeats. Okay.
Sure, yeah. So you also forgive me, this comes mostly from ignorance with this kind of literature, but you talked about comparisons and other folks who've looked at different case studies. And so I'm just wondering, this category of legislative aid, what does this look like in, say, other countries related or otherwise? Maybe this is American parochialism, but are these like aides on like interns on Capitol Hill? Or do these kind of positions not exist, say, somewhere like the United States or maybe the UK or France? Or are they serving different roles? Just where's Ukraine? This is the fit in the larger.
So
yeah.
This is the most conventional model you can get. So in the United States, there are legislative aides. Again, we have open record of who was hired by whom, It's a little bit less centralized than in Ukraine, but still you can get all of that information. And yes, you can be an intern in that office or you can be a hired professional. And in fact, many Americans who work this way, this is their whole lifetime career, right? They join one of two political parties, right? They become legislative aides, for example, because they have a law degree and they can draft an actual law. And then they work like this with different politicians just because everybody knows that they are professionals at what they're doing. Now, in other countries, that might vary, and this is especially with countries that have parliamentarian systems. So, like when we have more than two parties, right? Think about Germany. So, like again, I worked for a year in Germany, and I tried conducting similar analysis in Germany. So again, we have this open record and who works for whom. But the difference with Ukraine is that people are very loyal to their party. So if you're a legislative aide in Christian Democrats in Germany, you are always there. You have your party affiliation, your party ticket. You do not switch. In Ukraine, there are lots of legislative aides who worked for communists and then nationalists and then joined Batkivshina. And then, like in this convocation, we have all these people who like switched from Holos, so which were like very popular in Western Ukraine, to Sluha Narodu, who were popular all over except for like a very little enclave in Eastern Ukraine. And then back, like they're just like back and forth. And again, Holos marketed themselves as opposition to Sluha Narodu. Didn't really work. Yeah, these people just like do not believe in ideology, I guess. I mean, or they do not care. I don't like. I tried like the first iteration of this project was like by like conducting interviews with these people. Didn't really work that well as I expected because all of this is very sensitive. People do not like discussing their involvement in corruption schemes. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, so I was trying to think along the lines of their careers, more like, oh, so what do you do? How did you end up there? Like what are you trying to do with your career? And like the problem with that was that, people think about it as like employment in the parliament apparatus, not as employment with an individual politicians, even though they do not really interact with the apparatus that like runs the parliament. They interact with this only with this individual politician. As a result, their loyalty to an individual or to a party or fraction or coalition, like you name it, is like no, it's just not there. So that is highly problematic in my opinion, and that is what sets Ukraine aside. But again, these are normative statements, like they don't belong to political science.
I just wonder, is that unique to Ukraine? If I think about, countries that don't have consolidated political party systems, I would have thought that would actually be quite common. And even if I think, to international, assemblies, parliamentary assemblies, where you have these armies of assistants who, switch MPs that they work for, doesn't really matter what countries they come from, what like the political side of the spectrum they come from. They're simply looking for a job. So I think, in systems where you don't have a very solid, consolidated political party system, I would expect that to be the case. So I wonder, I guess the question behind that is, what does make the Ukrainian case unique? Because you have 11 comparative work, but I sort of wonder if you have an inkling as to, what are some of the unique features of that landscape in Ukraine? How can you think about that?
So what I'm trying to communicate here is that it's not unique. It's actually like normal politics. Yes, it is different from developed democracies with very strong political loyalty, party loyalty, and developed political is stable party politics is different. But then, as you correctly mentioned, if you would think about this like developing democracies, right, with no developed party systems, yes, people might get very confused about what they're supposed to do, as legislative aides, and that is normal. What I'm trying to like show here is that Ukraine, we shouldn't like set aside Ukraine here. Oh, it's so unique. It's a general trend of the latest years, but that's mostly about like resilience and resistance and survival in like difficult circumstances. And what I'm talking here about like thing that started long before the full-scale invasion, and that were like a completely normal process in a country that is kind of trying to democratize, but like really struggling.
But I wonder on the other side of this, I wonder, what role does informality play in some of the more established democracies, right? I mean, I sort of, the European Parliament, or some of the parliaments in Europe, elsewhere, in sort of more established democracies. And I kind of think we tend to underplay the role of informality that it does play in some of the more established systems. I wonder whether you can do something out there, whether you can actually could shed a little bit of light on sort of what is wrong in the other parliamentary system, where morality does exist, or simply have it wrong. And it makes sort of, even less visible than it is in you.
I would say, okay, so there is one thing that was different in Ukraine until recently, and this legislation was just passed, so we haven't observed any tangible effects yet. In the European Parliament, for example, and in the majority of developed democracies, lobbyism is a legalized activity. If you lobby someone, you have to report. In Ukraine, lobbyism just like as if it did not exist. There was no legislation to approve it, therefore it was kind of illegal, but also like everybody was doing this, but you didn't have to report it in any shape or form, meaning that if an individual politician was connected to someone through literally cash, that cash of unidentified origin, well, they didn't have to report it in any, at all. When it comes to, so you refer to European Parliament, and I will probably comment on that as a former intern at the European Parliament. Like there, yes, like you come there and you come like fresh graduate after some like European Affairs master's program. You really want to make a career. You are seeking for these politicians who are willing to work with you. But once you start working, for example, with socialists, the path for you to everyone who identifies with the right is just closed. Like nobody will hire a legislative aide who worked with socialists. Yes, you can switch countries, like as long like everybody is hired within the same thing, but like it's difficult, like transferring here. Based on again those interviews that I conducted that did not go as expected, as I mentioned, it's like it's encouraged. So it's like there is this like image of this like older female Ukrainian apparatus lady who is like sitting there and like maybe her job is just like keeping the record of who showed up to work, but she knows everyone. She knows everyone personally. She knows everything about your personal life. She knows you. Like she sits there and she just marks, and everybody knows these ladies. So what richer parliamentarians do, they approach these ladies and they're like, hey, like I just got elected. I need really good legislative aides who gonna like do stuff for me. Give me the list of people I should hire. And who does this lady know? Whom does she know? She knows those who are like showing up to work, being very effective, submitting lots of proposals, attending committees, being visible to her, and she just gives him the list and he reaches out to these people who might be legislative aides of other people at that moment. And he's like, hey, do you want a salary 10 times more? And like, who would say no to that? Right. So that's how, and this, parliamentarian babushkas, they're basically running the show. Right. And, I talked to these ladies there and they are very impartial. Like you cannot like even, they wouldn't even tell you which parliamentarian speaker since 1991 they preferred. They're like, everybody is good. I'm here to work. Like that's the highest level of impartiality, like, and no loyalty. So.
Any more questions for Anastasiia?
I can ask another one, but I don't want to just talk all the time. I was just wondering, is something that's unusual, and again, this is kind of unfair because I'm asking you to compare it to a bunch of stuff you haven't done, but I would guess that there's something that's really interesting in the Ukrainian case in like some of the transparency around like politicians and their tax records and all of this kind of stuff that actually enables you to do this work that might not be possible in other contexts, right? Like, is that something that's the case?
Absolutely, 100%. So like this is a problem that I ran into when working on German data.
Yeah.
You would think like Germany is a developed democracy, they should have everything, but no. In fact, lots of information is either not available at all, or you have to request it through like archival data, and like you're not granted access, and it's just a nightmare. So yes, the fact that everything is available online to all of us really simplify things, and I just had to like do a little bit of extra like run questionnaires and whatnot. But but when we look into other countries, there is a lot of similar research conducted in the United States, right? So and it's like a whole body of research in American politics studies. So I guess that's like that checks out. But when it comes to other countries, I honestly like I don't really see enough interest. like, especially in the developed democracies, people are like, yeah, they have legislative aids, they can do whatever they want. If we think about, for example, Canada, another developed democracy, right? They have this like amazing internship program in their parliament for people to work there as legislative aides. And like lots of you, and you can hire people from abroad. So like lots of Ukrainians actually come on a regular basis to work as legislative aides and like promote Ukrainian interests there. Well, my personal observation is that usually each politician has like one legislative aide who is professional to like overview everyone. And then everybody else are like interns, people who are there for no good reason, really, like, and it's like, it's not like they're there to seek protections from, I don't know, some like racketeering in Canada. Like it's not that. It's just like, these are people like in between their careers, so to say. They're there, but they know that it will not bring them actual career. So they are not investing their time and effort to really work hard. So it's like one politician, one real legislative aide. And then that person was probably with their politician their whole life. Like it's a personal relationship at that point. So they're not going to switch. So I cannot like, my network would look like just a bunch of dots not connected to one another. It's impossible to conduct, like that's like null findings, right? So, so that's another consideration.
All right, well, I'd like to thank Anastasiia for a wonderful talk, and thank everybody for your questions, for coming. So thank you, and she'll be here for another year and a half. So please come and ask her questions and take part in our discussions here at Harriman. Thank you so much.